Hello, and how are you doing, Ray? I'm
Oh,
still here. I
well,
have been working
you
like crazy.
you are two folks I want to put together too. So hopefully you two will talk a little bit.
I think this is actually probably a good topic even for us to converge on, because this kind of pretty much cuts to the heart of what I'm mostly focused on lately. How are you doing, Mario? Very nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I actually checked out YouTube after Ray mentioned it. Nice.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I'll follow your lead. I assume that maybe you want to wait a few minutes.
Yeah, let's give a couple minutes here for people to trickle in. Then other people will join after that, but gives them a chance to take it from the top. And to the extent that people might not know each other yet. For example, I don't know if Tyler, very nice to see you again, sir.
Yes.
Hey guys, I don't know how much I can actually participate on this one, but Robert, I really want to hear what you've got going on with the MCP server. We've got a broadcast going on that I produce, so I've got to watch on the Xano channel.
Nice. We'll also have the recording, and Daniel's also giving a talk here, like in 6 hours.
Yeah,
It's gonna be MCP overload today. I just wish it could have happened on a Monday, so it could at least be alliterative like Monday. But
Yeah, I was working on the tool for the demo purposes pretty much like embarrassingly late, but I'm a little nervous to share my screen and just then show it live because I think we don't have the experience of how that goes usually, but I'm optimistic. I think that it'll get the point across at the very least.
And you're surrounded by your fellow devs as well. You're all sympathetic to that, and I think the how is as interesting and as exciting as the what.
For sure. Sorry, I'm just fixing up a few things on my side. I could just start talking about it.
Well, yeah. How about you? We can do this whatever order you want, but you want to do a quick A/B check and share your screen for a tick?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna share my screen, and there we go. So that's my screen, and I'm going to just open Claude code, and yeah, okay, screen sharing. Basically, like what I've been working on lately is MCPs since pretty much the new spec came out in March, and then Ray gave me the fantastic advice of just, hey, you should study this. And I thought this immediately actually was when Ray, when you did the MCP talk, and then you introduced a new spec. And then since then, I really went down the rabbit hole because I thought that it would be really great if we could apply those things to Xano in particular, because it just seemed like a fit to me. If you're able to control something programmatically and we can put it in the hands of an AI, like to me, that just clicked and it made sense. And so that's immediately what I started doing. I started just building out MCPs and I started studying them really intensely. And it went from just starting to just figure out like, how does this even work, all the way into OAuth and figuring out the security part of it, just working on like a basic level, focusing on the fundamentals of security and all those things. So it went in a wild loop, actually went away from Xano for a little while because of just the inherent technology, like of trying to figure out how do we do this as a remote and how can I make this shareable just to make sure I'm working towards the right goals. And then it came back to Xano once I started really establishing the structure. And what ended up happening was that Xano had shadow drop their beta features for creating endpoints programmatically. And this was something I was just doing the brain dance for. I was just waiting. I was just praying for this day to come where I would be able to just bridge that final gap, because I look at this within the context of providing this for clients, like to go faster. And I was able to go faster in so many areas. And then it was just that area of building endpoints, which was just, again, still painfully slow. And then that one day I'm just looking at the Swagger documentation. I'm looking at it and I just see beta endpoints. I'm like, wait a second, could it be? So then I started, but it was. So I applied it into the MCP, and that's what I'm here to show actually, is just what does that MCP look like right now? Just from a practical point of view, I'm not expecting it to work 100% perfect, but I think it's going to get the point across. So what I have here in front of me is where I do most of my work. Actually, I would say almost all of my work right now is in the terminal, where you see here. And this is an environment where I have Claude Code initialized. And this instance of Claude Code is already connected to the Snappy MCP. So to just jump into it, I'm going to see if it can start to do something. Essentially, the idea is that I ask it a question, I ask it for something, and it's going to make me happy and do what I ask it to do. This is something that really surprised me with how much direction it needs in terms of how to approach things. It's been a very interesting experience, but what you can see here is there are so many principles about how to put this AI in a position where it's likely to succeed, right? And depending on how you build the tool, I can appreciate it is coming down to the screen a little bit fast, but there's emojis, there's very rich responses coming back. And actually, even while I'm talking, it's actually creating the API. So we're jumping ahead. But while this is all happening, this is actually reflected in the Xano environment. So it has tools, it has logic in order for it to deal with times where it gets stuck.
Can you maybe know the
Yeah, for sure.
right now?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Let me just double check which one it is. 151, 151. Okay. So it is updating right now, but it is essentially going in and using XanoScript and also self-correcting itself to create XanoScript logic that works. So you can see here, this was just created actually just live. And this is a very simple endpoint. You should see some of the endpoints that I've made with this. I mean, I'm talking about like 22 steps, clean syntax, and then I'm just able to test it immediately after. And just with like a few changes, it'll just work. I made 50 endpoints over the weekend while I was barbecuing. Like that's how hands off it is. Like I would just go tell it what to do and I'll just go enjoy my life. And I'll come back and it's, oh, look, 50 endpoints, all beautifully made within context, right? Like you would look at the database tables, you look at the business requirements, right? It's a real thought partner with me. The amount of situations that I'm able to leverage it in to go faster, I keep coming across new situations. Like for example, right now it created new table records. That's very helpful for testing, right? Like it can go and create its own users for being able to log into the system and then to be able to actually test and use functionality itself. It'll go get its own token, go through the system, and then actually use the system itself as a user, and then give you the results for the test. If I come back into here, I can show you, these are actually all examples. These are all demos. So I didn't make any of these. These are all made by the MCP tool. You can see that it's able to do obviously like for each loops, all kinds of logic, create variables, bring it back in as a response data. This is where I think this is also an opportunity for me to refine its approach over time, like to teach it what's the best practices. I have a lot of documentation that I've made in the past that I released in the form of boilerplates. I actually stopped using a lot of that stuff because I had moved on to other things, but it came back into the fold now because it becomes very relevant and helpful for a machine to basically learn from those things. So when I look at these endpoints over time, they become more and more robust. So this is configured in Claude. It also works actually in Claude desktop. And if I look over here, I can see actually 76 tools from Snappy. And so it has a huge amount of functionality. And this is actually something that I'm working on to just add more. I've actually also added in logic for it to validate itself, right? So it has, I've noticed over time, like where it gets stuck, it has tendencies where it tries to one-shot everything, for example. And I've noticed that when I try to keep it on the rails, that it tends to succeed more. So there in the logic itself, I'm giving it when it gets stuck, what it'll get, which is not clearly visible here, but it's in the rest of the responses, it's tips, right? It's like saying, okay, this didn't work. You should go check, validate your logic, and so on. What I'll do sometimes actually is I'll have to, this actually, clients will get a kick out of this, but I'll open 2 or 3 of these tabs and I'll just work on the same project with 3 different AIs. So one is basically building, the other one's analyzing, and it's a really great experience. Yesterday, for example, I had a call with a client and I really were able to build live on the call. And he was just loving it. Like we're talking at the beginning of the call, we look at an endpoint group. I say, okay, how about we just build these endpoints? Or you have something that you want to change in your system? Let's open another tab here and we'll have a discussion. I'm completely transparent about it, like with him, and he really appreciates it. I'm establishing a few tabs, and by the end of the conversation, we look back at that endpoint group from the beginning, and it's filled with 8 endpoints with a whole bunch of robust logic. Actually, I'll show you very quickly exactly what the endpoints were that we built during that session. And this was all made live on the call. So credit management API, this is actually quite robust. And you can see that in that context, like when I come in with a plan, right? Like I'm just doing a demo right now and I'm showing like, hey, just go create like a simple endpoint. But this is really this was totally made programmatically, automatically. Like I would want to adjust. This is way too many variables, obviously, but just to show like how much it can handle with just on its own. And this is not, if I look at any one of these, I didn't make any single one of these manually, right? Like I didn't even make this one manually. And you can see it comes out with the proper responses that I expect. Well, when I'm to the client, like as soon as they see this in front of them, they just want it on their system and they want to use it. It creates a very interesting dynamic of working together because they're interested in building this way. I could feel the dynamic of where they really want this. And then they just, can you meet tomorrow? Let's meet tomorrow and let's do this again. And they want to do this. That's like my North Star. In a way, that's who I do it for. That's also why it's great that I've made it easy to use. Anyone can use it. Everything that I'm doing right now, if you were to go to mcp.snappy.ai, totally for free, you will be able to use the exact same tool that I'm using right now. And that's something else that's also great experience for the client. All of that studying on remote servers and all of those things, it became very useful immediately because the first question from clients was, how can I use this? I want it. I was happy to have a very simple answer, which was basically just come here, and with a simple way of installing it, there's the instructions for it. I can actually just log in quick just to show what I mean. So really simple, like you just put in your API key and then you can save to just associate it with your account. And then you'll get your JSON snippet down here. You put it into your Claude desktop config. If I go into the settings here for Claude desktop, I'm dropping down into developer. I'm clicking on edit config, and then I'm just going to edit this file. I'm not going to open it because I have a whole bunch of API keys in there, but you put it in there and that's it. You just refresh Claude and it'll be there. And then actually after you do that, it will also automatically be in your, if you have Claude Code, which is what I use all the time, you can actually just use the command line Claude MCP, and this option right here, it says add from Claude desktop. It's going to automatically bring in whatever configurations that I have on the desktop into the Claude Code. This is something I take clients through all the time, which is how do we set it up? Claude desktop, put it into your config, open up the terminal. If you want to work in the terminal, use this and you're done. So I can take someone through this in like 10, 15 minutes. This is something that really was very relevant because I assume that probably people want to use this too. It's very helpful with cutting through the complexity of certain projects. I'm sure we've all had the experience of like where you get on the call with clients and then the scope just changes. Like, oh, how about invoices? What about split payments? What if we did this? And like all these little changes. And it's a lot of cognitive load to just try to hold all of that in your mind. This helps with that as well, right? If you want to make changes all the way down to the database level, and we're at a level where it creates less tasks for you. And also it just makes you very responsive to what the clients are asking for. I can't count the amount of times where since I started working with this tool and this flow that I've just gotten compliments on my speed and my reactiveness because they thought that I was able to do it so fast, and sometimes I won't even mention it, that they thought I had just forgotten about it. And then one day they're just looking at the tables and they're like, oh, it's there. Like that feature that we wanted is actually, it's there. It's deep in the tables where it needs to be with the data already set up so that when we're building out APIs that we're there and we're referencing to it and everybody's happy. Obviously there's a lot of stuff I could discuss with this, but I think I'll pause there for a second and maybe just turn it around and see if anybody has any questions, if you want me to focus on something in particular.
It's pretty erudite set of people here, but does everybody here know what, do people here know what MCP is? And are you familiar enough with like the flow that like he's not just talking Greek about this stuff? And I'm really liking the fact that we'd have more advanced conversation, but I also don't want to be leaving people behind if we just need to spend a couple of minutes going through the bones of this.
I'm okay. I'm good. I'm using MCP servers now, and this is amazing. The clarification though is this isn't just Xano's MCP server. This is a custom MCP server you built on top of Xano to do an incredible amount of features.
Exactly. So I pretty much, like for me, and this is really credit to Ray, I was really lost in just trying to find my footing at first. And then just like you mentioned, Sean, foundational, the way that I approach it was to build it from relatively scratch, but the Cloudflare SDKs really help with absorbing some of the complexity of just the HTTP streaming and just also just making it future proof in all of those aspects. But yes, to say that essentially I approached it with, okay, here's learning the technology, like the base, here's the foundations that are true for any application pretty much that I want to put within this context. For me, Xano was my target. I was like, I'm going to study their API and the features and pretty much apply it to here.
I'm blown away. It's awesome. I signed up and I'm going to.
Yeah, please. You are very welcome to use it. And I'm very happy to be improving it. And that's where I found to be a very interesting opportunity. Like I spent a lot of time, I was really up late last night because I realized that there was an opportunity to guide it more closely. And so I've been making a lot of updates so that it knows certain things. I already know, for example, how to set up Stripe in a certain way. Like I know what the API calls need to be. I feel that's the next thing that I'm excited to do, which is what I'm incorporating now, which is taking all those things that I know which work and then just putting it into the tool so that it knows without having to explain to it, how do you do Stripe or how do you do that? It just knows so that it just brings closer to reality the opportunity for it to just one-shot those things. And then even like, for example, it has the ability, just because the API has the ability as well to leverage snippets, which is very interesting to me. Like it can actually just take the snippet, it can install, it can manage snippets like that. That's also another area where we can get more predictable results. And yeah, like that's also another reason why I'm happy to be doing this presentation is because I think it would be amazing to get everyone's ideas to make it better. Like I've just been like in my cave, just working on this, but I'm more than happy for I don't pretend to have all the best ideas. I think that I like to try to also recognize good ideas, like when I come across them, and yeah, trying to make the tool better.
Is it possible is now a good time to ask questions, or
Yeah, of course.
two questions off the top of my head? Number one, I love it. I want to use it, but how do I make sure that it doesn't act before I approve?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, like the way that Claude code, like the way that it'll work in general is that it'll ask you for most operations if you want to allow it to only do it this one time, whatever it is, and then you can approve it for just one instance. I've always found that it doesn't do anything that I don't want to do because I'm there. I have enough of the built-in controls from Claude in order to be able to have it ask for certain commands that are more sensitive every single time. If anything, honestly, I found that it asks maybe too many times. I've actually had the opposite problem where I'm just like, just go, just do it. Because I try to create a situation where even if something was to go wrong, that I'm protected. So I will back up my workspace. I will do this work in an environment where it can fail. If it was to fail, then that's okay. Because yeah, like right now it is still beta, but yeah, to say that between backing up and just making sure if it's a client's project, they have a copy, I have a copy, I have the snippets, and then I start to feel more, and then between that and then it also asking me, like confirming along the way, I start to feel secure. I start to be able to feel like, okay, I can actually just walk away from my desk and I can come back. Did something happen unexpected? Mentally, I know I'm fine because I know that I can just revert worst case scenario, but to say that I've never had to revert, I've never so far. So yeah, but yeah, to your point, I think for sure excessive agency could definitely be an issue. And it's one of those things that I want to be able to add more granular control to. So you can maybe turn off certain functionality as you like.
Yeah. And the biggest concern is I don't want it to make a change to a production API and screw something up. So I see the use case for creation of net new things. I just wanted to make sure there was some sort of protection in there where I'm not going to use it and it drops a table I need.
No, for sure. I think that like right now, my approach is to throw everything into the bag and then get everything working. And then from there, it's like taking things out. I'm willing to be the person who gets punched in the face first, which I have been punched in the face by this thing quite a bit. And it's all to everyone else's benefit to come into the door after me.
The second question I have is I'm also building MCP servers for my company and building out various tools. I'm looking forward to getting ChatGPT support of MCP in Xano.
Yeah.
So I know Xano is working on it. I don't know when they're going to release it, but I'm like chomping at the bit because I can use the MCP in Claude. I just can't use it right now in ChatGPT. But as I'm going through all of the use cases and best practices for how to create various tools, the concept of sort of an MCP server with 10 to 20 tools, like do you have the same, what have you seen in terms of best practices when you're creating the tool? And I'll frame it as some people are saying, keep it really laser beam focused on a tool does one thing. And other people are saying, loosen that up a little bit and have the tool do many things because you have a 10 to 20 tool limit in a query. If a query can't handle hundreds and hundreds of tools,
I see.
best to get to have a single query focused on 10 to 20, they're saying at max. The second question is around descriptions on fields that you're putting in, like the inputs and stuff like that. How important has that been to the quality?
For sure. So I can say that to your first question, that this tool that I'm using right now, it has 76 functionalities. And I definitely know that this is not the most efficient. However, for me, this is a tool that I use for business. And I get more than a return on just giving it the most maximum plan, just because of the amount that it's able to do for me without having, with the way it currently is right now, you need higher limits to be able to really run this. But to me, it outperforms any employee that I could ever dream of. So even if I pay for the maximum plan on Claude, it's still peanuts compared to what I would pay for a person. I found that it only benefits from having these functionalities. I find that it actually is able to granularly use each tool for what it wants. Even for, let's say, I have this tool, which is very interesting, is for validating lines. So it takes out, if there's something that it, like a line of logic, if it's something it's not sure about, it can validate each line at a time. It uses that in conjunction with its other tools. So it combines different tools together. I think this helps a bit with controlling it because I can see every single thing that it wants to do. Like every time it says, I want to activate the task, I want to read this, and I can start to tell, oh, you're going in the wrong direction, stop. And because of it's so much keeping me on the same page about what it's doing, it's very transparent about that. And to you, the second question about descriptions makes a huge difference, really. It's the moment that I started improving the error handling and the tips and the descriptions within the tools is when I started to really find that it was just putting itself more in a position to succeed. So I would say that there's a huge amount of optimization that happens at the tool level. And that's where I've also made changes to just consider that like a human being, for example, is using this. So for example, if I look at these responses, right, like I'm sitting here looking at the screen as the stuff flies down. And if I look at, for example, I can see basically like emojis, right, to make it very clear to me, like cognitively what's going on. And I'm trying to call out, I'm trying to give back like very rich responses about what's happening. So this is success. It was true. It's updated, or this was deleted. Here's an X to show you it was deleted. And so that's great for me as a human. It's also great for the machine to know what's going on, because the machine is able to see those responses and to just very clearly know. And that's something that was actually more like I realized when I have 72 tools that it becomes quite intense to update that for everything. But I found that I've only had a better experience building with it and using it, the more that I enrich the responses and the more descriptive that I make them, and also the more tips that I give it. I'm like, you should do this, you should do that when you approach it.
And
so yeah.
Seems to be more single purpose tools inside of the MCP, but many of them just highly descriptive.
Yes. And that's also maybe just because of the stage where it's at right now, because fundamentally I'm trying to address, let me make all these, because the API for Xano is, I think it's like 120 functionalities. And so I like all those functionalities, almost all of them I would love for the tool to have. So even just as an exercise in just making sure that there's coverage there, I found that this to be a great approach, because again, like I can always trim it down later. And that'll be very interesting to me. Maybe there's a version of this that is optimized, as you said, that maybe there's a version of this that's optimized for clients, right? Like that it's just for diagnostic purposes, right? Because it's able to see request history. It's able to explain things to the client instead of me having to explain it. So I can easily imagine a version of this that takes away all the functionality to be able to delete or to do things that are in the red zone, and that you have a few tools and they're just more targeted towards just understanding the system, for example. And for now, this is more like from the point of view of building, this is what seems to be giving me the capability that I'm looking for.
I think there's a really good discussion in there around like tool design and generality versus specificity, right? It does not behoove us to say that each endpoint from Xano gets one MCP tool, but the job to be done should be fairly specific. The analogy is MCP is describing hammers, whereas agents would be describing carpenters. And this, I think this also gets to your point, Sean, of you want to do some specific stuff, right? You're giving it the brief to go be a carpenter, but don't go mess with the plumbing. There are standards that are emerging around multi-agent environments that will allow us to say, okay, we have one agent whose job it is to be an API builder, another one whose job is to be messing with the database, and the one who's messing with the APIs doesn't go messing with the databases. They can read the databases, they don't write to the databases, right? Just like the carpenter needs to be aware of where the pipes are, but they don't lay the pipes. In fact, their job is not go drive nails through the pipes. So I think this back and forth is going to be happening more. I am generally expecting that we're going to see MCP tools biased towards being more specific, because that way it is more the analogy of the hammer. One of the big use cases for why you'd have multiple agents is to give different agents different sets of tools, right? For that whole carpenter versus plumber thing. And part of the reason I bring that up is that as we look at even what Robert's doing today, right? He's got one agent, like a general contractor. In fact, frankly, it looks more like a handyman, right? It's doing all the things, right? And as we rise, we're going to be mixing together not only tools, but also agents. But I think the question that right now we need to be probably alert to which tools we're giving our agent at a given time, which gets to your question, like also the human in the loop aspect of confirming which things we actually want to run. And that is about the way our agents work with us. So if you were doing the same thing in Claude Desktop right now, you would get all these pop-ups, right? To the point actually is a bit annoying, but you'd be protected. And then you'd say, don't worry about it anymore. And then it was like, okay. And then it would run off in direction. So there's balancing act to be found there. But that's very much about the mix of how these chat-based or agentic interfaces work. And it's like the way you manage your relationship with your carpenter versus the way the carpenter manages their relationship with the hammer. The hammer does whatever it does. Your problem is the carpenter is not using the hammer properly. Sean, you just made a point about Swarm. Flowwise actually has some really interesting tech in this. CRUD AI has interesting tech in this. Like I said, Google's ADK, Microsoft's AutoGen, and OpenAI now has its Agents SDK that's also native to this idea of having multiple multi-agent environments, all of which is new tech, but we're going to be seeing, I think, a lot more of it in the coming 12 weeks.
Swarm's approach was more like an expediter agent, then hands off to the right agent for the job, which I thought was really smart.
And I think we're going to see like there's one whose her main job is like taking the original set of instructions and then giving the thing to specialists who then pass it around. And it's very cool when you see that stuff come together. I sat in on one session where also they had, and you were talking about like limited number of tools, where they tried giving one agent like a couple hundred tools to solve a problem. The agent got all confused because like the context window filled up with all this contradictory information, here's information of carpentry and plumbing, whatever else. For them, it was like doing data visualization for drug discovery. And so by splitting it into multiple agents, and really the differences among those agents, with this agent has this tools, this agent has this tools, this agent has this tools, and where the grouping just made sense, they were able to get much better results in a one shot, as opposed to having the whole conversation and still getting it wrong. Much like we've all seen when we have a confused conversation that's gotten too long going in any of these chatbots here.
Yeah.
But I was really excited about what Robert was doing here, because I thought your point about the Xano MCP server was very on target. He is showing what we can do with MCP and then to program for Xano, and just how much faster this sucker can go.
This is much better than Xano's MCP server, which is like rudimentary. You nailed it. This, what Rob's showing is, this is unbelievable. Kudos, hats off. This is awesome.
Thank you. I want to just like show this as well, just as we're going along, that really it's just, even just for as a diagnostic purpose, like you just tell it, hey, just go do this. And it's, yeah, you can see that it's able to go create tables, to create the columns in the tables. It can even create the sample data in it. It'll tell you exactly what does this thing do. This is where, if I look at my environment, I have MCPs connected to GitHub, for example, and I'm able to update documentation for automatically, right? Because it can see the whole system. It can see everything. So I tell it, hey, go to GitHub. We have a repo. Actually, it already knows the repo. Whenever we're done, hey, we just finished doing some work, update the repo. Where are we with the endpoints? Test the endpoints. Let's do a comprehensive test. And that is an asset really for the client, because it's just more ownability for them, right? So like later I tell it, hey, go and read the repo. So I don't have to explain it every time as well. So that's also something I found to be very helpful, is just even in just like keeping things on track and coming to consensus on things. So without even if we don't even talk about building, which is the part that I am the most excited about. If I look at the part about just in general, like even doing calls with clients, we're talking about their project and we're trying to understand like what's the best way to go forward. I found that it really helps and brings them into the experience more, which helps the engagement go better, because the more that they can do, the more that they can build, then with my practice, I found like that's a very beneficial thing. It creates a positive dynamic.
Super cool. All right. Can we open the floor to other questions? Mario, Tim, I appreciate you can't speak. If you want to put something in the chat, you're also welcome to ask a question that way. And Ivan, do you have questions for Robert about what we're seeing here?
Awesome. And yeah, just a question though. I had not been using Xano as much. I found it was so much faster when building things and using these kinds of tools to build using other solutions, databases out there, and backends is more correct actually. And so you mentioned something with the function stacking that it built, and I think you said something interesting. You'd probably not want to touch one of those variables, right? Because I'm sure if you spend time, you could understand what the variable does and all. But with that in mind, I'm just trying to understand, while this makes sense for the customers who are using Xano, would this be very similar to using other more code backends? Because when it's built the thing, regardless of whether it's, for example, Supabase or Xano, you probably wouldn't want to touch with it. How you interact with changing it would probably be the same. So then would it matter if it was Xano on the other side? I'm not sure if my question makes sense.
No, I totally get it. I personally think that this is the reason why I want to do this with Xano, is that to me, I'm very much interested in the aspect of this, that the output is not traditional code. And so I would say that, let's say if we're going to compare it to Supabase, I think that there's just more of a lift and there's just more of a cognitive demand, like to be able to comprehend what was built in Supabase or in anything that's in traditional code. And it's also always still going to be like a black box to the client side, like which because they're going to just look at it as traditional code. They're not interested in learning it. Otherwise they would have learned it by now. And I think that when it comes to Xano, that it really, I think there's a great opportunity to the outcome, it being in no code. I think that the client will get involved. I think that there are situations that come up where it is necessary. There's always going to be the way that I leverage the tool is for it to go to that like 85, 90%. And then I want to bridge that gap with what is the client's input into how it needs to be refined? What is my input as a person who knows how this should actually be? And then we are able to not get stuck in the weeds with that last final stretch. And so it being in Xano and Xano being the no code visual builder makes that part of the process so much more easier and just so much more collaborative. So I do find myself, I do take your point that, let's say theoretically, if we never had to go into where the outcome is, then it doesn't, if we're just dealing with it through natural language, then I take your point, then what does it matter? But I would just say that I have found that I'm quite often coming in to check out the results. This is where the conversation is happening with the client while it's building on the other side. And so when I'm looking at this is fantastic because we're able to see what's happening. And if this was traditional code that we're looking at, it just wouldn't have the same effect, I believe, that's one of the reasons why I like why I invest more time and energy into using Xano. It's also, but building with Xano is very clunky, in my opinion. I think that I want to say that basically, I think that I don't know if anyone really enjoys building with Xanos. If you could just go wave a magic wand and just have it appear, then everyone would be happy. I think that's what people want, but they don't want to actually build it. They just want the final result to be there. And so this is something that brings that closer to being possible, like where you just say what you want and there it is. And okay, we have to deal with from there, but we're not dealing with having to build it from zero, which I just couldn't take anymore.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Everything starts with pain, right? Like the amount of everything you see here is proportional to the amount of pain I felt. Like of just how fed up I was with certain aspects of it. But also to Xano's credit, I think that the outcome is fantastic. I think that it's hard for me to compare anything out there that really just takes all that logic and then just presents it in a way that is just very clear. I can look at this and I can walk through it with the client and get their sign off on it. And like that they understand, like, hey, we're looking for sessions. And then we're going to make sure that the logic makes sense, that we don't have an existing session and we're going to get the record from the users and from agencies and they're following. It makes sense to them. And this is where I want to end up. But this is just used to be a real nightmare. I would die a little bit inside every time I knew I had to build another one of these. And so now I'm happy that at least this will be, I've basically fired myself from this job, essentially.
Are you able to ask, let's say you have an API that is problematic for whatever reason, right? Creates heavy load or whatever. And that API calls other APIs inside of Xano. So is it sophisticated enough at this point to be able to make recommendations on improving this API?
I have found that yes, because it's able to get the logic for existing functions. It's able to build tasks and also to build functions. It's able to get the logic for the existing functions. And then it's also able to send payloads and then see the responses because it's able to see the request history. So it has it pretty much runs the full spectrum of what it would need in order to be able to figure out the problem. And also it's able to even update the logic and drop in debug tools. And so that it's able to also just raise to itself maybe the problematic area. So I have found that, I have had a number of experiences with it where I wanted to get into the testing side of things and it would run into problems. I was pleased to see that it was actually able to fix things as well, like to help me see and where certain things are not lining up, but also to say that definitely required a significant amount of translation from me to explain to it what is it that it's seeing, because it doesn't understand necessarily. It's actually really interesting to see how much it doesn't understand at first, unless you tell it. It's confused by what it's receiving back. It interprets this JSON response as sometimes like a literal representation of what it is. It thinks that's actually a string instead of just a context that the JSON has to communicate back with. It also doesn't have an understanding sometimes of how fast we can actually work. Sometimes I'll tell it, hey, make a plan, we're going to do this. And they say, okay, cool. This plan is going to take 2 weeks for us to build because that's how long it would normally take. And then I tell them, no, you're going to do it in 2 minutes and just go do it. Stop stopping yourself. Just go do it. Like definitely the communication part of it it getting itself to understand, to realize itself has been part. And to go back to what you were saying before, Sean, that's really where I communicate that is in the descriptions of the tools and putting it at that level.
Are there any other best practices related? Like I'm going down the path of building my MCP server to handle a lot of functions for my product. I'm just dying to know if there are any, besides the documentation and kind of single use actions, are there any other best practices or landmines you've stepped on? And
For sure. I would say that the landmines are pretty much in the inherent behavior of workers because they hibernate between sessions. And so they need to be handled in a way that you're storing whatever you want to be persistent, not in the props, but as a durable object, which is what they refer to them as. And so I found that one thing that I kept having to work around, which I continually still have to find ways to work around, is the flow of, okay, and what happens during the procedure. Where are we actually storing to be persistent between hibernation sessions? What is it that I'm going to need later, right? Because I'm keeping certain information. What information am I keeping it? Where am I keeping it? So that between sessions, then that information like API keys and whatever else is needed for the actual tool functionality is available when I need it. The fact that that these machines are turning on and off rapidly, that was a huge landmine to work around. And even just to realize, because there's so much documentation, it took time to really realize its own behavior and for me to realize what was going on. And maybe that was also because I tend to just dive headfirst into it. But I would say that definitely, and that's within the context again of using the Cloudflare SDK and the workers, which I recommend, like definitely to go down that road. Yeah, for sure. I would definitely say that the behavior of workers and the hibernation of them, it has a huge impact on what we're trying to do here. But at the same time, it also just makes it a lot easier to do other things, which is like their OAuth wrapper is really great. And that brings me to another landmine. Is probably the amount of customization that I had to do for the OAuth to work was unexpected. Just because Xano returns a JWT token, and then that's going to come into the worker, which the worker is going to generate its own internal token. And then there's that handshake that I have to really deeply understand in order to just coordinate it well and then have it work nicely between the token that I'm generating from Xano and the token that's being generated internally by the worker. So I'm sorry if I'm maybe going off the deep end with some of this stuff. Yeah, like that's really where I spent a lot of time lost in the forest, basically.
I'd like to open the floor, if I could, to Dimitris and Lakika, questions that they might have. I appreciate they joined a little bit later in the discussion, but want to see if we can be helpful to everyone here. Do you have any questions for Robert? Don't worry too much about what has been covered before, like maybe before you joined. Go ahead, shoot it out. If we've already talked about it, we can do it in the recording, but it's very likely that they're novel because this is a whole novel area.
I know that your MCP server man uses data source to be self-trained. All right. Now, the question is, how will the results look like if we don't have these data in the database? So if, for example, you deploy this MCP server to a new client where they want to build from scratch their Xano systems, everything in terms of their operations, like starting from scratch, building an ERP for a construction company or a manufacturing company, right? The opportunity here for you is to use the MCP and go and build it very fast for them instead of spending time, weeks on a Xano development. But what's going to happen if we don't have the knowledge included in Claude?
That's a really good question, actually. I would say that if I were to take away all the knowledge and just put it here in this situation, I don't have any information in the tools. I don't have an existing system. This thing doesn't know what the hell it's doing. It's going to just throw everything at the wall and it's going to be a total nightmare. You can just ask me how I know. Like I got super excited at the beginning when it started working at all. And I was like, oh my God, this thing can't do anything. It runs into problems. It builds the most crazy, illogical endpoints that I've seen. And it just doesn't. I was really just blown away actually by how much it wasn't working. And so I would say that's also speaks towards where there's a huge amount of value that I think all of us can add to these methods, which is the fact that all of us have experience in like how things should be built with machines like this. They need to know. I've given it the knowledge the knowledge from the context, right? Like it's able to see the context that it's in and it's able to leverage that to its advantage in a huge way. Like most of the time when it gets itself out of a situation, it's because it has existing context surrounding it, that it's able to go and look at existing logic and then compare what it's trying to do to that logic that it's comparing to. And I would also say that adding in more and more, it basically like direction from me at the tool level has also helped with that as well. Like with it not even needing anything in its surroundings, so that it essentially can just go into, that's the goal really, is so that it can go into an empty environment and then just immediately start building. And I think all of us have an opportunity there because we all have opinions and we all have things that we've built, and these machines don't know. Like I've seen that this thing, how much it isn't intelligent as much as as much as it seems like it is very intelligent. I've seen where like when it starts to talk about something that you know very well, and then you start to realize that it's not as smart as you think it is. Like when it starts to talk about something that I don't know, then it can seem like very smart, right? Like, of course, you're right. When it starts to talk about something that I know about, then I'm like, wait, it's like this thing doesn't know what the hell it's doing, right? And so that's the experience that I had with it. It was reassuring to me because then I realized that this wasn't going to replace me at all. I have to really invest time and energy into giving it the methodology, into giving it everything that I've built before so that it'd be more likely to succeed.
Mika had a question for you, Robert, about whether this is using XanoScript. And I thought maybe you could just spend 60 seconds talking a little bit about the intersect between the work you're doing and that technology.
It was a question, was it written down yet? Is it using XanoScript? Yes, it is. It is actually completely leveraging XanoScript. And it is really the key for all of this to work is for it to actually really leverage the tool so that it can go ahead and use this tool, essentially using only XanoScript.
Cool. Now we see
Sorry, I'm not sure if that answers the question very well, but because I know there's a lot behind that as well. XanoScript has been my bane for the last for a week or so since it's been released, but it's also been the great opportunity behind all of this.
Good. I saw you turn off the mute. Did you have a follow-up question or another avenue investigation for that?
Yeah, it like Robert did answer the question. I was just checking. I joined late, so I checking like what will happen. Yeah, that's actually great use case I see there. And yeah, would love to check out recordings later on. Sure. Thank you so much.
Robert, maybe before we leave here, you could bring up the mcp.snappy so that people who want to give this a whirl can do it and be able to experience it. I think you're making this a free resource right now.
Absolutely. Everything that I've shown is available for free. And if you were to sign up and log in, you would use the exact same tools that I use every day.
That is pretty cool. Great. Okay. That brings us to the end of the hour. And I know we would use every minute of here to be getting more wisdom from you, Robert. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I know we've all learned a lot, and I think it's super cool that we're having a conversation, not a basic, here's what MCP is, but like, here's a real MCP use case that is driving real business value for you. And I think it's going to be really cool for the rest of us too. And I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you very much, Ray. I just appreciate the chance to share this with everyone. And if anybody has any questions, follow up or anything, just please feel free to reach out to me. I'm an open book. Again, like I said, my goal is to just make this better and build faster. And this is a great group of people to share this with. For me to hear everyone's thoughts or engage with anybody in the community about this, it would be my pleasure.
Cool. Robert is available on DMs on State Change. And also, if you have questions that you're up for sharing more publicly, please, let's make a post out of them and share that. I think everyone's going to be able to learn a lot more because this is a big part of what's coming up in the next few months. Great. Thank you all. We'll be doing this again soon. And don't forget, in 6 hours, we actually have another MCP session. Daniel Petro from Xano is going to be talking more about their built-in features of building for MCP, just as Robert just taught us about how to build for with MCP. Take care. Bye.
Thank you guys. Bye.